They call me a courtesy resource. That's the phrase Breck Aldman used when he introduced me to the room. Not by name, not by background, just a courtesy resource from the local bonding community. He said the way you describe a folding table someone brought in from the hallway. Useful enough to have around, not worth explaining. I didn't correct him. I sat down in the chair closest to the door, set my coffee on the edge of the conference table, and listened. The room was on the 14th floor of the Harwell Litigation Group building, downtown Nashville, glass on three sides, and a view of the Cumberland if you angled right. Claire Voss ran the meeting. She was the CEO, a 40-something, sharp gray suit, the kind of woman who speaks in complete sentences and expects the room to keep up. She had 6 people around that table besides me. 2 in-house investigators, a pair of contract security men who'd flown in from Atlanta, a forensic tech, and Breck, her security director, who had the build of a man who'd played college ball and the manner of one who hadn't forgotten it. They were hunting a witness named Gerald Pruitt. Pruitt was the former CFO of a logistics company called Meridian Transport, the kind of company that looked ordinary from the outside and wasn't. He'd agreed to testify in a civil fraud proceeding that was going to decide, depending on which lawyer you asked, somewhere between $800 million and $1.2 billion in liability. He'd been cooperative for months. Then, 19 days ago, he'd packed a bag and walked out of his apartment on Demmenbrunn Street and hadn't been seen since. His cell phone was off. His car was in the garage. His sister in Chattanooga said she hadn't heard from him, and the investigators believed her. They'd run his credit cards. Nothing since day one. A tank of gas at a BP on Murfreesboro Pike. They'd canvassed his known associates, his college roommate in Memphis, a woman he'd dated 3 years prior, 2 men from his Meridian days who'd already settled and wanted nothing to do with any of it. They had nothing. 19 days, 6 professionals, a budget I can only guess at. Nothing. Claire Voss finished her summary, looked around the table, and then looked at me, politely, the way you look at a folding table. I'm sorry, Walt, is it? Do you have anything to add? I had one question. I asked it. Where does he go when he needs to feel safe? Breck Aldman set down his pen. We've covered his family, his known associates. I didn't ask who he goes to, I said. I asked where. What kind of place? There was a small silence. Claire Voss watched me with the particular attention of someone recalibrating. Breck picked his pen back up. We're pulling his childhood addresses this week. One of the in-house investigators offered. I nodded and said I'd be in touch. Nobody asked for my number. I drove back to Clement Street, unlocked the shop, and started with what I had. I've been a bail bondsman for 11 years. Before that, I spent 22 years with the U.S. Marshals Service, the last 14 of them in fugitive apprehension. I recovered 341 people in that time. Not all of them gently, not all of them quickly, but all of them. I retired when my wife, Carol, got sick, and I stayed retired when she died because Danny was 8 and he needed somebody at home when school let out. The bail bond shop is quiet work. It suits us. Danny does his homework at the counter every afternoon, and I'm there when he walks in the door, and that feels like the right use of whatever I have left. The shop is small, a desk, a filing cabinet, a coffee maker that runs hot, a corkboard on the back wall where I keep the open cases. I pulled a legal pad and wrote down everything from the meeting. Not the information they'd shared, which was thorough and had gone nowhere. The gaps. They'd covered people. They hadn't covered pattern. A man who plans to disappear uses a car or uses cash, and Pruitt's car was in the garage. So he had cash set aside, which meant this wasn't panic, it was preparation. He'd thought about it. He wanted to go somewhere specific, somewhere that already felt safe before the pressure started. Not his family, not his associates, somewhere that predated all of it. I pulled his background from the court filing, which was public record. Gerald Allen Pruitt, 53, born in Shelbyville, Tennessee. Grew up south of the city before the city grew south. Went to college in Murfreesboro, came back, worked 20 years in regional logistics before Meridian. He was a man who'd never really left a certain corridor of geography. A man whose idea of safety was probably no more than 30 miles from where he was born. The BP on Murfreesboro Pike pointed south. The tank of gas told me he was going somewhere he expected to stay. I got in the truck and drove. Not with urgency. Urgency makes you miss things. I drove the way I'd always driven on a search, which is to say carefully and without a fixed destination, working the logic one stop at a time. I started on Murfreesboro Pike and went south, and I stopped at a truck stop diner called Patsy's outside of La Verne, because truck stop diners are where people go when they want to be invisible in a crowd and eat a meal that doesn't require a reservation. The woman behind the counter had the specific kind of tired that comes from decades of noticing things without being asked. I described Pruitt, not his name, just the physical. Heavy-set, mid-50s, close-cropped gray hair, probably carrying a soft-sided bag, probably eating alone and tipping well, because scared men tip well when they're trying to be liked without being remembered. She said, "Booth 4, 2 weeks straight, breakfast only." Haven't seen him since Tuesday. I thanked her and left a 20 for the coffee I hadn't ordered. South of La Verne, the highway opens up, and the motels cluster near the exits like they always do, the kind of places that take cash and don't ask follow-up questions. I stopped at 3. The third one, a 2-story cinder block operation off exit 31 called the Ridgeline Motor Court, had a manager who looked at the description and looked at me and said, "You a cop?" "Used to be," I said. "Now I'm just a man trying to bring somebody home before things get worse for him." He thought about that for a moment. Then he said, "Room 114. He asked for a ground floor corner. Been here in 9 days. Pays in cash every 3, exact change. Doesn't use the ice machine." I said I'd leave the manager out of any paperwork I could manage. He seemed to appreciate that. I knocked on the door of room 114 at 2:15 in the afternoon. Gerald Pruitt opened it on the third knock. He was in a flannel shirt and reading glasses, a paperback novel face down on the bedside table, the curtains drawn against the afternoon. He looked at me the way people look at the thing they've been waiting for. Not relieved, exactly. More like finished. "Who sent you?" he said. "Nobody sent me." I said, "I'm here on my own time. Can I come in?" He stepped back from the door. I sat in the desk chair, and he sat on the edge of the bed, and I told him the plain truth, which is the only tool that works in a room like that. I told him I understood why he ran. I told him that the people trying to find him had resources and intentions I couldn't speak to, but that a man in his position, with what he knew, was more protected inside a proceeding than outside one. I told him that in my experience, and I had a good deal of it, a frightened man in a motel room gets lonelier, not safer, as the days go by. He was quiet for a long time. Then he said, "My wife doesn't know where I am. We can call her from the truck," I said. "Right now, before we go anywhere." He looked at the paperback novel. He looked at his reading glasses. He said, "All right." We stopped at a gas station on the way back so he could call his wife from a payphone. He'd left his cell behind on purpose, and I respected that, so we did it the old way. He talked for 6 minutes. When he came back to the truck, his eyes were red at the edges, but he sat up straight and looked ahead, and I drove north without saying anything because some silences are the right size for what they're holding. I pulled in the Harwell Litigation Group parking structure at 4:41 p.m. Gerald Pruitt straightened his collar in the visor mirror. I told him he didn't have to say anything in that building until he had his lawyer present, and that if anyone gave him a different impression, I would personally correct it. He nodded once, like a man who'd been given something solid to stand on. We walked through the lobby at 4:47. The woman at the front desk looked up. Then she looked again. I asked her to let Claire Voss know that Walt Greer was downstairs with Gerald Pruitt, and that Mr. Pruitt would appreciate a glass of water in a quiet room while arrangements were made. Claire Voss came out of the elevator 3 minutes later. She walked across the lobby and stopped about 6 feet from us. And whatever she'd been planning to say when she stepped off that elevator, she didn't say it. She looked at Gerald Pruitt. She looked at me. Then she looked at her security director, who had followed her out and was standing just behind her left shoulder with the expression of a man doing arithmetic that isn't coming out the way he expected. "Ow," she said. And then she stopped and started again. "When did you?" "This afternoon," I said. "He's all right. He'd like to call his lawyer, and he'd like a glass of water," in that order. She got both of those things moving without another word. Breck Aldman said nothing at all, which was the most useful thing he'd contributed to the situation. She walked Gerald Pruitt to a conference room on the second floor, settled him in with her in-house counsel, and then came back to the lobby and stood in front of me with her hands at her sides, and I could see her trying to decide which question to start with. I saved her the trouble. He went south, I said. Shelbyville corridor. Man doesn't go far from where he grew up when he needs to feel safe. Your team was working outward. I worked inward. You found him in 4 hours. 3.5, I said. The first half hour was paperwork. She looked at me with the specific expression of someone revising a document in their head. I owe you an apology, Walt. You owe me a signed contract, I said. Standard witness coordination rate, 30 days, with a rider that says Mr. Pruitt's wife gets a direct number from my desk and can call it any hour she needs to. That's my one condition. She didn't hesitate. Done. I shook her hand and took the elevator down and walked through the parking structure to my truck. It was 5:10 by then, a little late, but not by much. I called Danny from the truck and told him I was on my way and to lock up the shop and leave the coffee maker on. Did you find the guy? He asked. Brought him home, I said. There was a brief pause, the particular pause of a 12-year-old deciding whether to ask a follow-up question. He decided against it. Mom's lasagna recipe is on the counter, he said. I already got out the pan. I sat with that for a moment. The truck idling in the parking structure, the city coming into its evening outside, the smell of old upholstery, and the particular quiet that follows a thing going right. I'll be there in 20 minutes, I said. Don't touch the oven. He laughed and hung up. I pulled out of the structure and headed toward Clement Street, and the city opened up around me the way it does at that hour, the lights coming on one by one, each of them somebody's particular idea of home. I'd spent 22 years tracking people who'd run from everything they'd built, and the thing I'd learned, the only thing worth keeping from all of it, is that most people, when they run in a circle. They end up back near the thing that made them feel safe once a long time ago. I pulled onto Clement Street at 5:30. The light was on in the shop window. Through the glass, I could see Danny at the counter with his textbook open, his chin in his hand, working a problem with the focused patience of a boy who decided the problem was solvable. He was right about that. In my experience, they usually are.